Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again for another episode. And I'm absolutely thrilled today to have with me Rob Espenscheid. Rob, first of all, welcome. And thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me today.
Yeah, I'm just glad to be here.
So, we are going to talk about your newly released book, The Rise of Mad March. But before we get there, could you tell us your professional background?
Professional background. Yeah, I spent 40 years as a piano technician, piano tuning, repairing, restoring, refinishing, the whole ball of wax. I was just ran the company by myself. I operated in southern Iowa. It was sort of a rural service, but I was the only piano tuner in southern Iowa, so I stayed busy.
I've known piano tuners in my life because my mother was a pianist, so we always had one. But that's a profession that you don't see a lot anymore. But I know how important a piano tuner was to a small community because I grew up in one and we had one. So I was wondering if you could share, now that I've got you here, just share some thoughts on the role of a piano tuner and really how it was certainly 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and maybe even into beyond that, central to the life, particularly the musical life of a town.
Wow, that's a tough question. My business, since I was the only piano tuner, I just really went out of my way for people to just try to take care of their problems. The business included 3 or 4 colleges that I serviced. I was the head technician at Drake University in Des Moines for 25, 30 years. And so I don't know if I played a great role in the music of the town. I just know that I was available if they had any problems.
Okay, let's turn to your latest book, The Rise of Mad March. Can you tell us a little bit about the story, how you came up with it, and how you translated what was in your head to what eventually became on paper?
Yeah, I started about 3 years ago. I just wanted to write about rock and roll. This was actually my 5th novel. I thought about writing about rock and roll because I was such a fan for my whole life. And I got serious about it and just started evolving a story. I had some ideas. I'm the kind of writer that really needs to have a beginning and an ending before I get started. Essentially, what I chose to do was to write to my story as sort of a tribute to small town bands. I played a role in that in my life, and I wasn't really interested in anybody's having a career or being a national act or anything. I was just strictly local. The plot, you want me to go into the plot at all, or?
Sure.
It's what I was interested in mostly was the rise of the Mad March. And so I take the band from ground zero. The 3 of them meet by pure chance. They get into what they call the day room sessions, a lot of practicing. They finally play a live gig, and it was a disaster of biblical proportions, and it almost breaks up the band. They have one member, Henry, who is determined to keep it going, and they hold auditions and add a 4th member. They have another live gig that just everything falls apart, including the band. So they're just separate for quite a while. But Henry refuses to give up and tries one more time around Thanksgiving to pull them together. It works. They start performing, and they run into a guy who's sort of a talent scout, booking agent for a fictional record company up in Minnesota. And he believes in the band, and eventually he puts them on tour. The last third of the book is the tour. They go from Philadelphia, New York, back out to California. And when they get to LA, that's pretty much the end of the story.
So, what are some of the themes or messages you put across or through the storyline?
Some of the names,
No, some of the themes or messages.
some of my themes. Yeah. What I had, it, the story evolved. What I wanted to write about was a band before its time. So to do that, the story takes place in the early 70s. And I sort of labeled my band a pre-punk band because the punk genre became settled in about 75 and 76. So my band is sort of a punk band, but they don't know it because there's no nomenclature about punk. And so they're setting off. I made it tough for them. They're setting off with the kind of music that people have really not, falls on untested ears. So it makes it kind of tough for them.
So that's a fascinating time for musicians, a fascinating time to start a band. How would you assess the ability to start a band in the 70s as opposed to maybe today? Or is it just music and musicians playing music has always been around?
I would say I don't think much has changed. Certainly the equipment has changed. My son plays in a band in Austin, and I've been a roadie for that band for the last 4 or 5 years. And the situation there is pretty far different than what it was back in the early 70s. In the early 70s, in the late 70s, I became a manager of a band. They were a local band. And how that happened was I was just talking to Jim and I was saying, I'm working up in Des Moines at Drake University a lot. Maybe I could get you guys some gigs. And he was all for that. And so I started doing that and had some success. And before I knew it, a few months down the road, I pretty much became their manager. So that was quite a deal. And I fell back a lot on that when I was evolving the novel I just published.
I'd love to talk to authors about their writing process. So I think you said that you have to have the end of the story in your head before you start. Do you have a stream of consciousness where you just see it play out in your head and record the movie that's going on in your head? Do you outline your book and plan it out with a series of vignettes that you connect together, or all of the above, none of the above, or even something different?
Yeah, that's a good question. I suppose everybody does it different. I remember that Tim Robbins just recently passed away. Even Cowgirls Get the Blues author. And I was reading an obituary of his, and he said he often started out, had no idea what direction he was going or what the ending was going to be. And my reaction to that was, holy cow, how could anybody do that? I have to have an ending. If I'm going to go from A to Z, I've got to know some idea where I'm going. I do not start with a detailed outline at all. I've got some central characters, sort of a general outline where they're going to go. It's sort of funny because I've never had a problem exactly with the writing process. Like when I'm on chapter 16, I always know where chapter 17 is going. I'm not sure quite how I do that. Evolving a story, it's just a continuing thing. There's so many changes that go on. You're just constantly thinking about it. And I write every day in the morning, 2 or 3 hours, and try to make a little progress every day. That's about all I can say.
So, as you mentioned, this is not your first book. Can you tell us about your other books?
Yeah, I started writing back in around 2009. So I've been at it maybe a little bit earlier. I've been at it about 18 years or so. What makes me a little different is that I didn't start until I was in my 60s. I was still working full time. I had written for magazines for a while, but that's sort of on the bucket list. I wanted to try fiction. And I started out, I had an idea for a story. I thought it could be a short story, and it eventually evolved into The Jackass Alliance, which was my first book. It was sort of a what do you call it, like a young adult kind of a novel. But it was about 2/3 of the way through that when serendipity sort of stepped in. I took a motorcycle trip with my son. We were heading out to Nashville. We had family out there, and I was the one responsible for the route. And so I happened to notice that we were going to go close to Shiloh National Park in Corinth, and so we stopped there. And when I was a teenager, I was a big Civil War buff. I practically taught myself how to read by reading Civil War novels or histories. And so when I went to Shiloh, that sort of just opened up that whole thing inside me, which had been sort of hidden in my college years and military years and all that. Found out that Iowa played a huge role at the Battle of Shiloh. And so I went back home and started researching and got this whole idea that to write a Civil War novel, boy, that was just an enormous 3 years of my life. It just a real awakening. It was a quantum leap in my writing. I loved all the researching. And then, Tom, something else happened that really bloomed, and that is writing the first novel too, but especially the Civil War novel. I just fell in love with the writing process. And yeah, I didn't expect it. It was a total love affair. And it has stayed with me until this very day. After the Civil War novel, 2 more novels followed. My wife and I moved to Texas. We were living in Southern Iowa. We moved to Texas in 2018. And as soon as we got here, of course, we ran smack into COVID. And it was at that point that I wasn't sure I was going to keep writing, but I had tried to start a piano tuning service down here in Texas, but COVID destroyed it. And suddenly I was retired and I had all this time and, okay, why not keep writing? And I wrote the Sentinel papers and finished that in 23 and then kept on, just started with the Mad March.
Let me turn to your experience with Stoney Creek Publishing, because they're the sponsor of this podcast. And I always like to ask about what was it like for you? First of all, how did you get to Stoney Creek? And what was that experience like for you working with them?
Yeah, working with them has been great. And what happened was through my first novel, 4 novels, I'd never really been published. I went the self-publishing route, and I had some close calls with publishers and literary agents too. I was just sort of left waiting at the altar. And so when I finished the Mad March, it was like, I want to try again to find an agent, to find a publisher, blah, blah, blah. And I really wasn't sure what to do with it. I had the manuscript and I was reading Texas Monthly Magazine, and they had an article in there about a publishing house in Texas. And at the very end of the article, almost as an afterthought in very small print, they said, oh, by the way, here are 3 or 4 other small publishing houses in Texas and the kind of books that they are publishing. And Stoney Creek was on that list. And the thing about Stoney Creek was that most of their releases, fiction or nonfiction, were Texas oriented. And March was not. And so I felt like I was a total long shot. But I made an inquiry. They asked, I'm not sure about the whole process. I think they asked for a few pages and a plot summary, and I sent that to them, and they got back to me and sent us the whole thing. And I kind of forgot about it. I guess maybe, I don't know, a month or 2 went by, and the phone rang, and it was Lauren Steffi and from Stoney Creek, and said that they liked it very much and wanted to send me a contract. And to be perfectly honest, Tom, I almost dropped the phone.
I believe it. So what work did Stoney Creek and Lauren's team help you with? Was it in editing? Has it been in marketing? Obviously, we're talking on a podcast, so that may be part of it. What did they really bring to the table for you?
Yeah, they sent me a contract, and they sent me a whole pamphlet of papers about their process. And of course, one of their processes is professional editing. And this was just a great opportunity for me. And I worked with, I think his name was Smith, and his first name escapes me. And I had some problems in the manuscript, and they picked up on it, and we made the corrections. And this is the way things happen in writing sometimes. If you got something wrong and all of a sudden you're facing a real pothole, sometimes when you dig yourself out of it, your manuscript is better than what it was before. So it was crucial for me to work with them. The Mad March takes place in the 70s, and so I've run across this many times, including the Civil War novel, which having things in the proper time frame is just so important, and you have to check and recheck that. And so they were very good working with me on that. And I remember I had a few songs in Mad March, and sure enough, the songs were released in the late 70s, not during the time period I was writing about, and things like that. They've been a joy to work with. One of the things that I always remember about Stoney Creek is how easy it was to send in what I had, even with literary agents and a lot of publishers. There's a lot of rules and regulations that go into it, and they only want a certain thing, and they only want it sent a certain way, and it can be exhausting. You get things like, send us 10 pages, because if you send us 11 pages, we're not even going to look at it, stuff like that. So there was nothing like that with Stoney Creek. It was a very simple process, and I thank them for that.
So, Rob, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode. But before we leave, I wanted to ask you if any of our listeners wanted to find out more about you, or certainly find out about your books, what might be the best place or places for them to go?
Yeah, first off, I have a website, firejacker.net. All my books are listed on there, and they can certainly, if they have some comments, if they read Mad March and want to say something about it, I'll be glad to get back to them. I'm also on the Goodreads platform, in which I'm open for inquiries from them. So that would work. My books are available, of course, on Amazon, both print and Kindle. Very inexpensive Kindle book, by the way. The books, my novel should be in Barnes and Noble. And as Stoney Creek told me, pretty much any private bookstore, chances are The Rise of the Mad March is not going to be on the shelf, but they will be able to get it for them.
Rob, I wanted to thank you again for taking the time to visit with me, and I hope we can continue this conversation.
The troubles we had, Tom, I wish we had more time, because one of the big deals with the Mad March is with gender. Girls in a rock and roll band in the 1970s was an interesting thing to write about. Maybe there'll be another time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.